right, everybody, we're here at Dane's platform. I was on a nice long hiatus all over the world this past summer, as was my special guest here, Sean Don. Sean, how's it going?
Oh, it's great. I'm just getting smacked in the face by jet lag right now. But I'm thriving. I'm ready for this. I'm excited for you to shed some knowledge.
I was going to smack you in the face for not being able to figure out how to get on the freaking podcast.
It's your terrible podcasting platform, Dane,
No,
clearly.
I didn't want to admit, you know what it was?
What is it?
So when I resent the link, it said output speakers Yeti, and I changed that to my computer. So it was trying to get you to broadcast out of my microphone. So I had the external speaker was set up improperly on my end.
Fucker.
Yep, that was my fault.
It's all good. We're here now.
I didn't want to tell you that, but then I was like,
You're blaming it on my computer. I'm like, fuck you.
Yes,
my computer's great.
Your computer sucks. You're such a piece of shit. You're such a cheap ass.
Yeah, please.
All right, so let's see. While I was doing that, while you were trying to figure that out, my wrongdoing, I was eating some pancakes. You and I today were talking about nutrition on that note. You had some questions regarding...
I got questions regarding everything. Not everything, but quite a few topics.
Okay.
Of course.
We should call this, I should title this the Sean Dane podcast.
Maybe. Just might work. Yeah, so what I'm doing right now is I'm trying to unfuck myself from all the terrible food that I've been eating, honestly, for my entire life.
Right.
But yeah, so I wanted to talk a little bit about gut health, fasting, maybe. I don't know how much experience you have with that, and then fermented foods, and I even want to talk about what is it, gelatin a little bit too, because I know that's supposed to be good for gut health. But yeah. So basically, yeah, I've just been listening to a whole bunch of podcasts and books and articles and stuff like that over the past couple of months, and based on my findings, it sounds like the gut microbiome, all that bacteria in all your intestines and whatnot, plays such a huge part in not just your physical health, but literally every aspect of your life. It can affect your brain, all that stuff.
Your mood, your appetite, everything.
Exactly. Yeah. So I've been reading and listening to all this stuff, and they say that fasting is a good way to kind of heal your gut a bit, give it a break, let it recover itself. So I'm going on a 5-day fast for the next 5 days. Clearly, I just started technically tonight after dinner.
Okay.
I guess if that counts. It feels like cheating, but whatever.
Are you gonna be, when you're fasting here, what do you consider a fast? Are you going to be consuming any greens at all that maybe are processed? So a green powder. Are you going to be consuming not gelatin, but bone broth? And just because it's a liquid, you get your bone broth. Are you going to be having lemonade that's just water with lemon juice, or is it just a straight water fast?
Straight up water fast for my first time. Figured I'd raw dog it, see how it goes, and then make adjustments from there on out. But yeah, literally just water, and then the only other thing I'm going to include is some Himalayan sea salt, because I guess you could technically get water intoxication if you drink too much water and don't have the electrolytes. Your heart gets kind of out of rhythm, I guess. So that's the only thing that I included just for safety. But yeah,
the only thing I'd say. I've always liked when I played around with this stuff. Let's say you go 2 days hard where it's a fast, and then a true fast, and then that third or fourth day you can start throwing in kombucha.
Yeah.
But I mean, you just want to see what happens. So maybe 5 full days you're gonna notice something for sure.
Well, that's right. Yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just I do believe fasting can be effective. So I want to. I'll backtrack here. So from about 2009 till like 2011, I would spend quite a bit of time on a guy named Martin Burkhan's blog, and it was called Lean Gains. I don't even know if it's around anymore.
I've heard that name before, but
Okay, so he was just like this super shredded guy, and he would do fasts. So it was a 16-hour fast, and like all of his clients would do really really well. Um, and I'll backtrack even further back to when I really first started getting into nutrition. There was a book called The Warrior Diet from a guy named Ori Hofmeckler, and he supported a 20-hour fast with 4-hour feeding window. And this is like back to 2004 to 2005, all the way up now till 2011, 2010 with Martin Burkhan. So my understanding is that what you're saying, like what is it, like apoptosis, I think it's called, where they
autophagy.
okay, yeah, where it's like cleansing of the cells and all that stuff. That's real. The only thing that I question though is like how real it is after 3 or 4 days. So I guess my take is like, and I spent some time with Lane Norton this past summer, and he talked about it quite a bit, and he thinks it's all bullshit. And I'm sort of somewhere in the middle. I think that it's more along the lines of fasting something. It's similar to keto. It's similar to low carb. It's similar to high carb, low fat. These little tricks that you can play on your body, but I do feel that fasting has a little more of a healing effect, especially if in your case where you've dealt with you've consumed inflammatory foods your whole life, and then you just traveled all summer, so you probably weren't eating that well while you were traveling. Um, you probably grew up on not a standard American diet, but pretty normal where you're eating junk food.
Oh yeah.
And sometimes you can tell by how many cavities somebody had when they were growing up. If they had more than 2 or 3 cavities, they're probably eating like shit. And so I do feel like if you're looking for like a reset, I think it's effective. I think it does work. I think it's also shown that like, philosophers and religious type people, they would go on these fasts as almost like a way to reset their brain and to go like do some soothsaying or whatever you want to call it, speak to God and all that stuff. So,
Yeah.
it does work, and I think for your case it would work. But I don't know if I'm answering any of this scientifically for you right now.
No, I mean, if anything, it's just good to talk to somebody else about this stuff, get a second opinion, because of course, you always have your own biases, and you often find the other source on the internet that confirm your bias. But but yeah, I mean, you're saying stuff that I agree with. Like I didn't have a whole bunch of cavities growing up. I think I've had like one,
Okay,
maybe.
that's pretty good.
So I've been fortunate there, but I went from I've always been like skinny fat, I was skinny fat growing up or pudgy growing up, husky.
Yeah, husky.
And then especially once I got into like heavy lifting, like strongman and powerlifting, and then into throwing, I just ate like a bag of dicks, just trying to do anything to gain weight.
Right.
At one point I was drinking a gallon of chocolate milk a day, which is a great strategy to gain weight, but also a great strategy to just tear up my insides, apparently, because I think exactly, yeah. So I've just been trying to undo all that damage that I did to myself back in, what was it, like 2011, 2012, 2013, over the past couple of years, and I feel like this is going to be a good way to kind of reset all that stuff. And like you said, I think the mental aspect of it, like you said, the philosophers, Stoics, would often do stuff like this. And so that's another reason why I do it. I think it's just good, like a mental reset, a good test of discipline and all that stuff, and kind of cleanse my brain, reset my body for this next year of training.
Well, who's the guy that wrote? Is it Samuel the dude that wrote Huck Finn? Mark Twain. Fuck.
Yeah.
What's his real name? Or was it actually Mark Twain?
I think it was actually Mark Twain.
Okay, so Mark Twain had a.
I just googled it. Samuel Clemens.
Samuel Clemens. Yeah, that's what I thought that was his name. He actually had like a cottage off of his main house that was like almost a half mile to a mile away from his house, and he would go out there and write. And they said that he would go out there for like 2 or 3 days at a time and not eat and just like go to town and write. And then he would, come back for a couple of things of food or something every like other day for a little while, just because that would be like his creativity time. So it definitely is real. But now, so I'll tell you that I read a book called Gulp and The Good Gut, which is from Justin Sonnenberg and Erica Sonnenberg. They're at Stanford, and they have the whole lab where they study the microbiome. And then going back all the way now to 2009, 2010, Weston A. Price Foundation I went to that conference, and I watched a woman. She wrote the book called Natasha Campbell McBride wrote the book called The GAPS Diet, and it's basically, she believes that you can heal or at least alleviate some of the side effects of autism by healing the gut, and then the gut can then communicate better with the brain.
Yeah.
So if I can use like a quick analogy, okay? You get pigs, and you can get a pig that is born out on pasture, or you can get a pig that's born in a big pig house, right, where it's just they're mass producing these pigs.
Mm-hmm.
The pig that's born out on pasture, when they're born, their microbiome is going to be developed and exposed to parasites, fungus, bacteria, cellulose in the grass, and all dirt, anything that's in dirt, right? So they're going to be exposed to that at a very, very at the beginning of their existence. And they're also, not only that, but when they're born, the amniotic fluid that they're getting is going to be developed from their mother, and their mother's lived out on pasture her whole life, so she's had defense mechanisms created in her body so that they can stay healthy around in that environment outside. So when the piglet's born, the piglet gets, that's like passed on, and that piglet gets the microbiome after they're born,
Mm-hmm.
and they can survive out on pasture. But now, if we go to the case with the animal that's born in the big house where they just mass produce these things, and then after that they inject them with antibiotics for the first 20 some days to keep them healthy, and then on top of that they wean them off of their mom's breast milk around 23 days. So if you compare it to the one out on pasture, the ones out on pasture are getting their mom's breast milk for 8 to 10 weeks.
That's right.
And so when they're getting that on as well, now the mother's making antibodies in her milk, and that milk's being passed on to the piglet, so the piglet can survive while it's out on pasture. Whereas the piglet that's in the house is not getting any of this bacteria. But now what happens is, now put that pasture, if you put the piglet from the house out on pasture, its likelihood of surviving isn't going to be very high. It probably will if you're in a decent environment. It probably is like 75% chance that it'll survive, but it's not anywhere close to as high as the pig that was actually born out on pasture, because they are exposed to more bacteria, and that bacteria creates the lining in your stomach, which also helps to digest food and signal to your brain then how to function and appropriate hormones and stuff like that. So that's where keto can get you, or not keto, the fasting can get you there, Sean, is that you can, not that you're ever going to perfectly reset it, but you can reset it a little bit, and then by slowly reintroducing specific foods, you can heal your gut and close up that, what they call the leaky gut syndrome. So
Right. Yeah.
I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've heard that that's pretty much the same thing in humans as well. So
Yeah.
like if you're I was a C-section baby.
Yep.
Because I was like 10 and a half pounds.
Mm-hmm.
And luckily I asked my mom. I was breastfed for I don't know how long the typical time period is, but I was
9 to 14 months is normal.
yeah. But whatever. I was breastfed for a while. I wasn't necessarily like straight up raised on formula, but yeah, if you're C-section baby, you're raised on formula, you kind of have you don't, like you said, get all those antibodies, and you don't get exposed to those little hormetic stressors that kind of develop your gut. But yeah, no, that's definitely It's right up the alley.
Now think about this: is that with someone like you, I was a C-section baby as well. For some reason, I was relatively healthy when I was younger, but I was breastfed for a little bit longer. Um, but if you sit there and you think, okay, so when you're born, Caitlin, when you're born, what is it? Is it the amniotic fluid that makes? Yeah, when you go through the birthing canal, that's what passes into your gut.
Yeah, it's something like that, I think.
Yeah, so we didn't. You and I were both C-section babies, so we didn't get that. But because we were breastfed, we did get the colostrum from our moms, and
Hmm.
that they call it the golden milk for a reason. That's the
That's right.
first milk that lines your gut, and it's like that's some freaking powerful shit. And what ends up happening is that they know that babies that are C-section born and babies that aren't ever breastfed, that never get colostrum, are much more likely to be exposed to autoimmune diseases or to have autoimmune diseases, ear infections,
Oh
uh,
yeah.
like all of this stuff, psoriasis, anything along those lines, because they never develop that your antibodies to be prepared for living. So that's this is where I would ask you now is, okay, what's your plan once you get off your fast? What's the next goal? What are you going to introduce slowly? What foods are you looking for that are going to provide you that slow adaptation?
Right. Yeah. So that's one thing that I have yet to figure out. Because I was going to take. I got 5 days. I got time to figure it out. When I'm not cooking food, doing dishes, all that stuff, I have way more time in the day to mess around and research this stuff. But from what I have read, um, like I said, like you mentioned, bone broth and what not kefir, but kombucha, but
Yeah.
I guess kefir as well. Eventually,
Yeah, that's where I wanted to talk about all that stuff.
yeah, all the fermented foods. And even just like reading about it. Do you think that like so? I want to include more fermented foods, just to help out my gut, of course.
Right, right.
But do you also think that just in general, like eating more fermented foods, and increasing the health of the gut and the microbiome, like does that help with like a more favorable body composition or
Yeah, I think so
your
for sure.
performance?
Yeah, for sure. Um, fuck, where do I start with all this shit, dude?
I was gonna say, well, what are your favorite fermented foods? First off, how about
Well, why don't we start first with how I would have you ease in, and
that? Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I would say it's got to be very, very similar to raising a child when you first start to give your child food. At least the way you should do it. And I'm sure people are going to listen to me and think I'm a lunatic, but this is what we did. And I think bone broth should be the most important thing, the first food that you're going to give them. You give yourself,
Yeah.
and then you get bone broth, and then after about a day or two, you can start to add in some gelatin to that, and then what are you outside?
No, I'm inside though.
Is that your end?
Oh, my window's open here. Let me close it.
Okay, that's
Oh,
funny.
it's stopped now. That was weird. All right.
And after you introduce gelatin, and then what we liked was butter. And the thing is that butter is a what would be first though, Caitlin? It wasn't. It was. Oh yeah, it was vegetables. So like carrots and sweet potatoes and then you go carrots and sweet potatoes with butter in it. Avocados. Um, and the thing is like the problem I've always had is that all these people are like and I think you're one of them, Sean. Huh? Egg yolk would be later though. Um, a lot of these people think they're allergic to milk or they can't handle milk, but I think what that actually is just they have terrible gut flora. So what we've done with our kids is like then we make pureed carrots and sweet potatoes and we add butter to it to help them digest it. The thing that I think that's positive with butter, at least the butter that we get raw grass fed butter, is that it's like slightly cultured, it's slightly fermented.
Yeah, it
And
has a little
that's
bit more of the natural enzymes and stuff, right?
right, and that's where it's going to help your gut start to really develop. And so what I believe is important is that you slowly, as you're adding in like carrots and sweet potatoes and avocados, that you slowly increase the amount of bacteria that you're getting. So you go from butter, and then you could go to something like a sour cream. And actually, most sour creams are not terrible. They're actually relatively usually just cream and salt. And then after you would use a little bit of sour cream, then the next step would be you go to yogurt, because typically yogurt only has 4 strains of bacteria. And then after yogurt, then you can introduce kombucha, and then after kombucha, because there's usually about 15 to 20 strains in kombucha, then you shift over to kefir, which if you have the kefir that we're making, you're going to have 58 to 60 strains of bacteria in that. So it's like, not that it's that slow of a process, but then you start to use, you introduce egg yolks. So you see if you're allergic to eggs, you usually get a little rash from an egg yolk on your hand. If you put it on your skin, you can see a rash there. So using egg yolks, and then typically that's when you can start to like really see if you can slowly introduce stuff. And I recommend boiling meat at first before you really start to use meat. But while you're boiling meat, you boil all your vegetables. So when you're boiling your vegetables, that's when your body starts to adapt and create the right gut flora to digest the fibers. And then after you boil them and you consume them that way for maybe a day or two, then the next step is you get kimchi or sauerkraut, or we sometimes get this radish one that's a fermented radish too. So it's like, then you can add in the fermented side, because that's adding a whole different type of fungus, or no, not fungus, bacteria from what you're eating, and that helps with the digestion as well. And then that can lead to, you had asked about better body composition. And the thing is that in sauerkraut there's a ton of vitamin C, because of the way it's being processed, and it's very bioavailable. So then any nutrients that you get in there, your body absorbs more, and it's
makes it more like bioavailable, if you want to.
The fermentation does, it makes it so much more bioavailable. You get more vitamin C out of it, and then when you get more vitamin C out of it, you feel better. You start to operate a little bit better. Vitamin C is a very potent antioxidant, and now you start to feel a little bit better just from that.
Then you start building that momentum, and then all of a sudden I feel better. I don't want to eat a fucking dozen donuts, and then all of a sudden I don't want to sleep for 6 hours, and then No, I totally get that.
And then I would say then you got to step into the you got to really test out the grains later on. But usually you can add in the meats, and then you can start to just like grill meats and stuff like that. And you can see which meats might bother you, which meats don't bother you, and maybe none of them do. Typically meats don't bother anybody. But then you can start to add in other foods that you've found in the past cause inflammation or made you feel like shit, and then it's just a game of like singling out, oh well, peanuts make me fucking fart like crazy and get diarrhea. Well, maybe I should stop eating them.
Right. Yeah. No. See, that's one thing that I had planned for this off season was obviously. So first, I want to do this fast, and then I was going to stick to a more ketogenic approach for a while, because I personally like the cognitive benefits from being on a ketogenic diet, and then plus like the fat loss. That stuff's good too, I guess. But really the cognitive benefits, because I like to just do a whole bunch of work, whatever it is, editing videos, writing articles, whatever, during the off season. But and then eventually I was going to get into, once I got back to eating more of a normal diet, do that sort of I've heard it called like an elimination style diet, but like you said, introduce food, see how it affects your body. If it obviously doesn't agree with you, then remove it, you add in something else, and it's just continual experimentation. So that's exactly what I want to do moving forward. So that's cool. How long do you think I should take to kind of work back in after this fast? So like you said, work up from what was it? Bone broth to like some vegetables with some butter, and then how long should that process take, or how long do you think I should take?
Well, that's tough, because with a kid it's going to be a lot longer. Like, we have a full-blown like 12-week plan that we use with our kids, which we have 2 more coming here shortly in the next probably 10 weeks.
Jeez.
Did you know that?
You're gonna have twins?
Yeah, Caitlin's pregnant with twins.
That's crazy. Congrats.
Yeah, dude, it's fucking nuts. So For you though, I feel like, dude, I feel like you could probably have bone broth right away, and then like that second meal, you're like, well, let's just try out like some vegetables pureed with a little bit of butter or something. But you got to boil the carrots. It's got to be really soft with some butter in there, and then by that, see what happens like if for an hour after, note, see, take note and see if you feel gassy or not, and if you don't, well, then you move on and you say, okay, then for dinner I'm gonna have buttered carrots that are mashed up with boiled burger that has turmeric in it or something like that. And I think you'll notice by nighttime, like, but you can't. The thing is what people tend to do when they fast is they're like, oh man, I didn't eat for 5 days, so I just want to stuff my face. It's like
Right.
that's where you're gonna have to control yourself and be like, this is part of the test. This isn't a 5 day test. This is just the beginning of the test. The beginning,
Right. Right.
like you're getting into a test that's really gonna be like 3 months long.
Yeah, no, I like that.
Um,
I like that analogy because that's exactly what I was. At least that was my mindset. Like previously, last off season, the whole ketogenic diet thing is kind of reoccurring for me every off season as I cut down and like I said, kind of reset my body a little bit and try to reset insulin sensitivity so I don't get diabetes in like
right,
10 years.
right,
But even then, I would do just really low carb throughout the week, and then like every Saturday, I'd be like, oh, cheat meal and just eat like a fat fuck for
yeah,
usually a day and sometimes a day and a half, depending on where I was and what I was doing. Um, and then go back through that cycle. And I think this is the first year where I think I want to go like a legitimate ketogenic diet, no cheat meals for 6 weeks. We'll see how that lasts, but
right.
um, yeah,
I'd be interested in that. I will be.
yeah. No, I mean, I got my little blood ketone monitor. I was already at 0.2 millimolar this morning, which I was surprised. I thought it was going to be at like straight up zero.
Yeah,
Um, And then, I mean, we'll see because everyone says it takes a while to adjust to the whole ketogenic style, and I've never really checked my ketone levels or done even like a piss test
right.
uh, to see if I was in ketosis like any other year. So who knows if I actually was. So I guess we'll see. I'm excited to see. I think because they say by about day 3 during this fast, your ketones will get up above like 2 millimolar, and that's when you really start feeling like the therapeutic effects. So.
Right.
Um, But yeah, so eating all these foods, I really like the idea. You said you're kind of working up in terms of strains of bacteria that you're introducing with these fermented foods. Um,
But it's not just what you're getting from. It's important to remember it's not just what you're going to get from the fermented foods, but it's also how your body is also going to react to fibers and to starches. So, a lot of people are like, "Oh my God, starches!" And I know uh, you're not going to be eating starches, but you're going to get a little starchiness from if you have cauliflower or carrots.
of course, yeah,
And that's one thing from my understanding from what the Sonnenbergs have done in their lab is that they found that starches actually do a really, really good job with the microbiome. And they even talk about it's called MACs, I think, medium or something accessible carbohydrates, moderately accessible. So the carbohydrates, because you're cooking them properly and you're boiling them, and then you should actually boil them 2 or 3 different times and let them cool down.
yeah.
The
I've,
carbohydrates become more accessible. So again, your body uses it a little bit more effectively. But that would be for after you get off keto. I think my thing with keto is that I think it's a good trick. It's a very good healing mechanism for people that have epilepsy, um, especially teen, like the teenage epilepsy population can almost completely reverse epilepsy when they go full keto. So
yeah,
it is clearly a healing diet, and anybody who would argue against that is they don't study the profound effects it has on epilepsy. So, but for long term, I think it's going to be interesting to see. I think it'd be good for me. I think it would be good for like maybe 2.5, 3 weeks, and then I would start
hmm
to feel pretty soft. It's weird because a lot of people will bring up the Inuit and they're like, oh, they ate keto diets. They're eating basically whale blubber and seal meat all the time. And it's like, yeah, but even when what was strange with them is that they were not burning for some reason they were not burning ketones when they were studied. They were still they were still using glucose, and nobody could
Yeah.
really figure that out. But and it's something just with their evolution that somehow they evolved that way. It's sort of strange. It's interesting to read about. But for you, I think it. I shouldn't have said that for me it would only be 2 to 3 weeks, because I would want to hear from your side. Maybe you do last 6 to 8 weeks and you still feel fine, but maybe you get to 10 weeks. You're like, all right, I need a little bit more juice when I'm getting into training.
Oh yeah, well that's what that's another reason why I want to commit to it for a good while is I've heard some people say, that they hit that 2-3 week mark and then, they're like, oh, they start, like you said, feeling soft or just kind of a little bit more fatigued than normal, or even their anaerobic exercise performance suffers because, you obviously don't have the glucose and glycogen to keep up with that kind of stuff. So that's why I'm kind of sticking it with it for 6 weeks. I think ideally, I wanted to do 8 weeks originally, but then like after I planned out all my training for this next off season, by the time I get back to the training center and get back to somewhat real training, so like this first 3 weeks, I'm really just going to go in and lift pretty easy, just get a nice swole, do whatever, just kind of just to stay active. The next 3 weeks is like my kind of aerobic GPP conditioning phase. So I think that would be perfect for the whole ketogenic diet, getting a little bit more fat adapted. And then after that, I go right into my anaerobic lactate sort of GPP cycle. And I was like, well, there's no way I'm going to subject myself to that kind of unnecessary stress when I'm getting into more serious training. So that's when I'm going to start introducing more, definitely fruits, the starches in terms of like sweet potatoes or plantains or something like that, and then we'll see about I'll try out some of the more gluten heavy foods, I guess, and see how my body reacts. But yeah, definitely excited to see how this goes.
Oh, you're saying like to see if you react to gluten.
Yeah, exactly. Like you said, just introduce different things because once again, I think there's probably a reason why I feel so good cognitively. Like I've heard that eating gluten can obviously just if you do have an intolerance of some level to it, it's an inflammatory food and it causes oxidative stress in the brain, and that oxidative stress can cause anxiety and kind of cloudy thoughts and all that other stuff. So we'll see, and hopefully, I mean, if I do end up cutting gluten from my diet altogether, let's hope I'm just that much more productive with all my, stupid business ventures I got going on. But yeah, so
Dude, I will say that one, I think you should try that to really bring out the microbiota accessible carbs from the potatoes. But on top of that, when you bring them back in, I've seen two people that every time they eat gluten, it's like they just get trashed. It's like they're completely, like the next day they're brain dead. And I think that there's a relationship between gluten and like thyroid disorders or diseases like Hashimoto's disease, like people that are typically on T3 or T4.
mm-hmm.
I swear, definitely more gluten intolerant. Just from my, I don't know, a little bit of reading, I think, with this topic, but I think in just my anecdotal experience, it's like anybody who's got some weird thyroid disorder typically can't handle gluten.
Right. Yeah. I mean, could be coincidence, but yeah, I think just the way that we're raised nowadays, and I really admire the way you raise your kids, where you're kind of doing it in a much more holistic, healthy sort of way on a farm, organic, grass fed, all that stuff. I think that stuff's sweet, and that's definitely something I want to do with when I have a family growing up, and even hopefully eventually in a couple of years here, as I'm still competing as an athlete, hopefully that's something I could switch over to.
Dude, I think it can lead to. I think it could help you significantly.
Right. Yeah. And that's what, it's one thing that I was a little skeptical of because, they say, oh, it's not going to make that much of a difference. And now I'm at the point where I could literally a 0.1% improvement.
Dude, that's the thing. What if it's 30 centimeters? What if it's 50
exactly.
centimeters? What if it's what if you just went from, instead of gulping down, plastic water bottle water and heated up meals in plastic in the microwave, and all of a sudden you're getting all these xenoestrogens out of it. What if you stop doing that, and all of a sudden your test just goes up a little bit and you recover a little bit faster? Like, that's what people don't think.
Well, I literally just listened to a podcast about, I forget, I think the guy's name was Dr. Anthony J, and he wrote a book called Estrogeneration.
Yeah.
I haven't read the book, but I listened to the podcast, and yeah, it didn't even occur to me that all these different estrogenic compounds, and like you said, estrogens and parabens and whatever it is, are like, I think the one thing they said was like, well, don't drink out of bottles that are plastic number one.
Yeah.
And because they almost certainly, like 99.9% have was it BPA?
Yeah.
And then I'm sitting on this airplane on the way back from
just that.
from Europe, and then I'm like, I look at the little water bottle they gave us, and I'm like, oh, this is plastic one. That's sweet.
Yeah.
And I was like, and then I what else did I do? I had something else to drink, and it was like they gave us a little bottle of juice, and once again,
Same.
plastic number one.
Yeah.
And I was like, dude, this stuff's everywhere, and yeah, no, I'm definitely at the point in the career where I'm like, all right, I need to do all those little things, and yeah, no, that's why I've gotten into this stuff. I think it's so sweet just doing all these little experiments on yourself, trying to see how your body reacts, and just doing anything you can to improve your quality of life and performance. It's worth a shot.
Yeah, 100%. I think too, like, you've got to make sure you're monitoring once you bring carbs back in, you got to make sure you're monitoring your protein quite a bit too, because I think it's just, it's sort of funny because if you follow the bodybuilding world and even powerlifting, it's like, dude, these guys are just absolutely, like, just crazy about the amount of protein that they're taking in and how much they're monitoring it. But at the end of the day, like, these guys fucking know what they're doing. Like, bodybuilders do know what they're doing. Do I think that we have to have, like, for me, 230 grams of protein a day? Maybe not. But for someone like you, Sean, like, you might sit there and find, like, okay, well, let's try the range, like 200 to 210 grams of protein a day.
Right.
And you're like, all right, well, I felt pretty good. You take notes for a week, go over it. Then the next week, okay, let's try. You go from 210. Now let's try 240. So we're starting in the range of 230 to 240. And you can take notes and see how you feel. And then the next thing, what you do is you cut back down. You go back down to like 180 to 200, somewhere in that range, and see how you feel. And to me, that's the easiest way to play these games with your body, because your body has to adapt. And based off of how much it has to adapt, you're going to be able to notice a difference. And it's like, if your body's utilizing 240 grams of protein, then you're going to notice it, So it's interesting to play around with that too. And I think that sometimes, like, the new age guys, like even David Asprey, guys like that, like, sometimes they forget, like you can push the protein limits quite a bit and see a pretty positive result, especially if you're doing, the type of training that you're going to be doing. So yeah, I just wanted to, I didn't,
right.
Yeah, I know.
No, I mean, that's definitely, see, I hadn't even thought about that. I was just, at least this past year at the training center, it's just been, I'm going to go eat. And honestly, I'd probably, like you said, push the boundaries, because when I go into the dining hall, it's, most of the time it's not the most appealing. So I'm like, all right, well, I can either eat this really crappy pasta dish that they made. It's dried out and it just doesn't taste good. Or I could eat, 3 or 4 chicken breasts and some flank steak and some vegetables and a piece of fruit. I definitely was closer to probably over-consuming protein. But that's a good idea to kind of, like you said, test out those different ranges and see how your body reacts. I like that.
Because the other thing is that just based off of, especially with introducing gelatin early on and bone broth, like, I think you might actually be able to handle it better, and you might actually just feel better. And maybe you're in at the same ranges as you were last year, but you might feel better because your body has a healthier gut.
Right, and I feel like this is something that, like, so let's say if it doesn't immediately improve my performance, let's say I don't get that meter that I'm looking for right now, I think even just improving these little things like your gut microbiome, or taking care of your extra body, or staying away from xenoestrogens, whatever it is, it might help with, like, longevity, like you said. So I might not be throwing 80 meters next year, but let's say, maybe once I do throw 80 meters, I'll continue to throw 80 meters for more years than I typically would have been used to.
Yep. I do think too. Look into ratios of tryptophan to your protein intake, because sometimes you do want to make sure that your tryptophan, that you're not taking in too much tryptophan, because I've read a little bit of research where it's like you try and have a balance. So with the amount of like meat, let's say muscle meat that I'm eating, I want to balance that out with gelatin, because gelatin doesn't have tryptophan. So the more my amino acid balance, the healthier that balance is, where the tryptophan isn't as high ratio wise. I feel like you're going to notice a little bit more in the joints, and you're still going to recover pretty well. So just, that's something I've played around with as well.
Right. Yeah. No, that's speaking of gelatin, that's something I wanted to talk about, because
Okay.
that was something else that, I mean, like, obviously um, you're a big proponent of it, and I've tried it before, and I don't think I was quite ready to, embrace
The
the benefits of
weirdness.
it. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, of course. I mean, like, you take it and you're like, this is good, and then you take it and you don't really know what to expect. So you don't, maybe it's, if I take it now, it's placebo effect because I expect things to happen. I don't know,
Yeah. Yeah.
but I definitely want to try more gelatin supplementation this year. So when exactly would you say, like, is the best time to take gelatin?
So here's what I like to do, and I like to go back and forth between gelatin and collagen and just see if I've noticed anything. Uh,
What is the difference exactly between the two?
so gelatin is, I forget the process that they call it, but it's basically like the hides of a cow and or a pig, but typically a cow, and the joints, the knuckles, the any ligaments, stuff like that. But then they take that jello, the gelatin, the powder that they just processed, and then they hydrolyze it. So when they hydrolyze it, it turns into collagen, and that's when it mixes a little bit better. So it's collagen is literally just gelatin that's been hydrolyzed. So
Oh, okay.
it's one of those things where um, it's the main positive amino acid is glycine, and that's where um, I think you just play around with the gelatin and the collagen, and it's easier to work with collagen because it does mix pretty well. I still feel like there is a little bit of a placebo effect with the gelatin when I have it in the morning with my coffee if I'm fasting. If I'm even if I'm not fasting, I'm still going to have it in the morning with my coffee. I mix 3 tablespoons in, and then I do it again at lunch with 3 tablespoons, and I think that sort of sets me up, and I feel really good. My joints feel as well as they can for somebody who's done a lot of dumb lifting and has Lyme disease, and
Right.
um, and then at night I typically will eat all if I'll have my all my meat at night and whey protein, and then I'll have when I have my whey shake, I'll put in like 3 more things of gelatin. So in 1 tablespoon there's 9 grams of protein. So I I like to base it around having like a protein fast in the morning, and then after I train, I have it again, as because it is anti-inflammatory and isn't it glycine is so potent. So
Right.
for you, that's what I would base it around.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
It's a that might be
I
twice
was
a day.
yeah, no, I was just doing some research. That's literally, that's what I've been doing all day, is just looking up different dietary strategies. And yeah, the whole gelatin thing, and I came across a study, and it was really only just one study, but I saw it reported across like 10 different websites. But it was that um, vitamin C enriched gelatin.
Yeah.
So pretty much
Yes.
just gelatin mixed in a vitamin C rich drink like orange juice, or I think the study they used black currant
Do you want to know
juice.
what Gelatin Pro 2.0 is going to be?
What's that? Is it going to be orange juice
That's going to be
gummies or something?
It's going to be Gelatin Pro with fucking vitamin C because of that study. And I'm not I'm not even kidding you, but right now we're working on a collagen. So Chris is like, "What are we going to do? We're going to come out with collagen, and then we're going to come out with fucking Gelatin Pro 2.0 because you want to add vitamin C because of these studies that you're fucking reading." And I'm like, "Yeah, dude."
Right, right, yeah. So that study said that, what was it, like an hour before plyometric exercise? I think they did jump roping or whatever.
Right.
Um, but yeah, so I was like, all right, well, so I'm gonna start taking this stuff either before I throw, and then maybe before I lift too, and then I even read that glycine is it can help with sleep. You know,
Right.
calm
Absolutely.
your nerves and stuff like that. And that's a problem I have is especially when I go overseas, sleeping well throughout the night. You know, I can go to bed at 10, 11 p.m., but then like come 2 or 3 a.m., like literally I'll wake up, go to the bathroom, and then all of a sudden it's like my body's just, you know, going crazy. I'm like, all right, well, I'm totally awake right now. It's 3 a.m. Over in Europe, and I got to compete in 3 days. Like, what am I going to do? So I'm definitely going to try. Like you said, I would like to try gelatin literally morning, afternoon, night, just whenever I can, see how much it affects not only my health and my gut, because I know what it even has a glutamine in it, and glutamine is good for repairing the walls of the gut or something like that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, to see how it affects performance too, because I guess the USATF sports performance guys they emailed Tagata and the other coaches at the training center, and they said that what was it epicatechin
Yeah.
is the name of the substance. It's found in like green tea and dark chocolate and cocoa and stuff like that. They said that supplementing with
EC
this,
is it ECGC?
that is another type of catechin.
Okay.
So there's ECGC and there's like two other kinds, and then epicatechin, and that's supposed to help with like tendon stiffness. So I'm like, all right, well, if I can take this stuff before training to increase tendon stiffness during throwing, and then I take gelatin with vitamin C to repair the tendons and stuff like that, like I'm just going to be fucking wired
Wolverine.
come next year, you know? Right? Yeah, yeah. I'm going to be recovering in a matter of no time, and it's going to be some magical combination.
Yeah.
Um,
I think that, dude. I think that that's good shit. I think it all makes sense. One thing I did want to throw in there with what you were talking about with the vitamin C and gelatin is this is going back to our fermented stuff. I have a whole book that I got on Amazon. I found from like the late '80s, and it was this shitty translated German book, and it was about how the East Germans would test levels of lactic acid after kombucha consumption. So because there's lactic acid in kombucha, they theorize that it would improve the usage of lactic acid as an energy source, and so these, their speed skaters and stuff were taking it, and their swimmers would drink kombucha, and they found that they didn't really understand the mechanism, but that even these endurance athletes, speed skaters are, I guess they're endurance, but they would use lactic acid as energy, and therefore they would break down less in training and then thus perform better.
right.
I mean, I know they're on a lot of drugs too, but it was like the book was. I gotta look for it out in my chicken house. It's called like Kombucha, the Great German Elixir or something. But
That's crazy.
yeah, I found this like this is probably 2009. Um, but yeah, I wanted to throw that in there because I do believe that shit works, and all that stuff will pay off with the tendon stuff you're talking about. That's stuff that we're just unraveling now, like the microbiome stuff. This is the Sonnenbergs are leading the research on this, and actually one of my best friends from college who hooked Caitlin and I up, and when we were in college, like he introduced us together. He's doing a whole bunch of research on prebiotics and what inulin does, and how it can have a very positive impact on the gut flora, and then thus leads to more lean muscle mass, and this is all simple stuff that if we can sit there and digest as coaches and as athletes, and you sit there and you go, you know what, well, Sean, let's try this prebiotic, or let's heal your gut and see if we can get you a little bit more lean. Then you have a little bit more lean muscle mass, and you're the same body weight, you're going to be moving
Yeah,
faster, and it's like this is where the gains can be made. Like that's what we're missing out on.
exactly. Yeah. Speaking of prebiotics and stuff like that, probiotics, and I don't have too much experience with that stuff. I've taken some in the past, once again, not knowing what I was really getting myself into. Do you think that it's like, do you think that any old person should just come off the street and buy a prebiotic and start using it, or do you think it's more of like a, hey, maybe try to reset your microbiome
Yeah.
a little bit, introduce more fermented foods, and heal yourself as much as you can naturally, and then introduce that stuff? What do you think?
I think it depends on the person. I think and the willingness and capability of that person for long term focus, because you got to think like some of these people I'm getting, we're like a low income area, and they're not super motivated to change their diet, but I'm going to sit there and say, okay, so here's another good trick. So some people say, well, you should completely reset your gut. Screw that. You shouldn't take probiotics. And I typically would agree. But if I get some random person who comes off the street and they're not going to want to do fasting. Yeah, they're going to eat cleaner, but they're not going to fast.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, let's use probiotics as a good tool. Try and reset their gut while they're completely changing how they're eating. Because then what ends up happening is like because their body's completely changing their makeup, they get these cravings, these crazy cravings. So you got to use tricks like probiotics to try and heal their gut while they're eating better. You got to use tricks like Gymnema sylvestre to curb any sugar cravings, or glutamine. So you've got to use those types of tricks to heal these people. But in your case, Sean, um, I would say hold off on it, because you might even sit there and say, you know what, I don't think I need probiotics because I'm shitting normal right now. Maybe the first 2 weeks you're pissing out your ass, or you're having bad reactions, but then you all of a sudden your gut heals itself and you start to have normal bowel movements. Well, then you're fine. I also think there's another option called GI Fortify from Pure Encapsulations, and I think that's probably the fastest thing that I've seen that has healed guts incredibly well, and it's super cheap, and it's all just herbal, like aloe and stuff like that in there. But it's GI Fortify from Pure Encaps, and they have a lot of probiotic line as well, but their GI Fortify is the best. So
Yeah.
I think in your case, I would hold off and just play around a little bit more.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, no, it's definitely. I need to write down like all this. I don't know. So much stuff bouncing around in my head right now. Like I said, I just need to figure out how I'm going to break the fast and where I'm gonna go from there,
Right.
and all that stuff. Because yeah, this is all good
Dude,
good stuff.
I've tried stuff like milk fasts. I've done milk fast for like 4 days. Like I've
Do you
done,
just drink milk?
yeah, dude, it's crazy. Potato fast. Like you realize that
I've heard that.
you can go
Like
on
I
a potato fast, dude. You could lose 15 pounds in like 4 or 5 days.
right. I heard that that's actually like a thing. Like this potato diet where people eat just
This is all back to the MACs, the microbiota accessible
yeah,
carbohydrates.
exactly right. That's and when I heard this person talking about it, they were saying that this potato diet, you literally just bake the potatoes, but then you let them cool, and letting that the process of heating it up and cooling it, like you said, makes that the MACs or whatever more
Yeah.
accessible, or whatever it is. He called them resistant starches. So
Yeah, yep, same thing.
you can take that white potato that could be regarded as high glycemic index or whatever,
Yep.
and then by the process of heating it and cooling it, you create you lower that GI response
Yeah.
or glycemic index, and yeah, no, like just doing that and then eating potatoes for a week straight. Yeah, dude, losing 15 pounds, not only just because you get tired of eating potatoes,
Well, that's
but
the other thing, and that just brings us to
yeah,
another diet. Then all of a sudden, we're at like somebody like Stefan Guyenne, who's a professor at Washington, and he runs Whole Health Source, but he's another guy, and he's all about the food reward system. So it's like that's the thing. Well, why is it potatoes do that? Well, it's the MACs, it's the food reward system, because you get sick of them after a while,
exactly.
and it does have a little bit to do early on with losing some water weight. So again, like all this stuff is fun stuff that I played around with, and it's all fun because that's a trick. If I have a weightlifter who's trying to cut the last 3 days or 4 days, and it's funny because I'll put my wrestlers on something like the potato diet,
Right.
and then what's funny is 4 days out they're already below their weight. So then the next day I'm like, all right, eat 8 eggs, have some hash browns, and they're like, really? I might not make weight. No, dude, you're like 3 pounds under. You're gonna be fine. And then they feel
Right.
great going into the competition. So it's like it's fun to I think that's one thing that I value with myself, and one of my close friends, Brandon Fries, he's the one who's really led me down this path, is that you can really play around and see what happens to your body. And sadly for me, a lot of it has also been attributed to me just trying to feel better from my Lyme disease and trying to change that stuff. So it sort of led me down this path too with Brandon. And but in turn, I've learned a lot, and I've read a lot, and I've talked to a lot of people who've also tried this stuff, and you can see, if you do eat a lot of fermented foods, do you get, some people actually they'll have a fungal response, and they'll have like a yeast infection, and it's like, well,
Yeah.
then your gut's really fucked up. Like, you have candida. Well, now we gotta really go back to the beginning and try and work this out, and that's just stuff that a lot of athletes don't factor in.
Right. Speaking of like candida and stuff like that, that's another thing that I've heard over all the research I've done over the past couple of months, like candida and SIBO, like small intestinal
Yeah.
bacterial overgrowth or whatever it is. Have you have you ever done any like testing or stuff like that to figure out like your what your gut microbiome is made up of and all that stuff?
Yeah, so when I had been on, now this is going back a few years now. I had been on antibiotics for 2 years, and that's when I had. What sucked is that I knew all this stuff about. Not that I knew it all like I was a genius, but I had read quite a bit about this. By this time, I was well indoctrinated with the GAPS diet. I had spent a lot of time reading and studying this, but I was still, I was still a fat ass, and I just never really implemented anything. So what ended up happening is that I'm on antibiotics for 2 years, and people don't realize that the reason why we give animals antibiotics is because it makes them fatter. So
Yeah.
it just goes along with this whole microbiome like research, is that if we destroy our guts, we get fatter. Like, we know this. When you go on antibiotics, you gain weight. That's what happens.
Oh yeah.
If you go on antibiotics for a long time, your gut gets destroyed. You can't digest food. You can't absorb nutrients. So you just start to turn into this inflamed sack of shit, which is what I was by the end of this 2 year period. And so, fortunately, I think a lot of this goes back to GI Fortify. I know I should be getting paid for this from Pure Caps. But
You
so,
gotta hit them up.
yeah, so what I would do is I would take my antibiotics in the morning. I would wait 2 hours for them to take their course through my body, and then I would use fermented foods and GI Fortify. So over 2 years, I had never gotten a yeast infection, and then I got tested, and I had met a new doctor who talked to me, and he was like, let's get you tested for candida. And what was weird is that within like a week after that, he tested me, and I had already started to get like a yeast infection, and I had never
That's
had
crazy.
one in my entire life. So I was like, "What the fuck is going on? I got this white shit on my pecker." It's like, oh shit, I have a yeast infection. But I never actually went and got treatment. What I ended up doing is after that. By this time, I did a little cleanse, and just like changed a couple things in my diet. It cleared out. Then when I went back to him about, this was 6 weeks after the test was done, I tested higher with Candida albicans, and he put me on something called diflucan, and the only reason he put me on it, this is like a bomb that just kills all fungus in your body,
That's right.
is that and the only reason I took it, so I was one of those guys that with Lyme disease, I was very willing to do standard conventional medicine and also do very like holistic healing type,
Right.
and that's typically not like, most people want to like try and heal their Lyme disease by eating clean and shit, and I think they're all idiots. And it's like, there's somewhere the answer's in the middle. So for me,
Yeah, I want to take the best of both worlds.
right, so I was on all these antibiotics and low dose naltrexone and Mepron and just crazy drugs. If you look those drugs up, people are they're crazy drugs. But diflucan also has a positive impact. It can really screw up Lyme. It can kick Lyme out like pretty quickly. It can shut it off, and that's what ended up pretty much happening, is that once I took diflucan, it sort of finalized the course of the candida, and then I had already been starting this process of healing my gut. My Lyme was already like subsiding substantially from the diflucan, and then that's when I was already on low dose naltrexone, and then that's when I met my next doctor, who led me to this path with sort of resetting my hormones and all that shit. So it's like,
That's right.
but it all goes back to, it's like, people think that antibiotics should just be thrown around, and dude, they're amazing. They're fucking legit as hell, and I think people should use them, but we abuse them. And the other thing is that we abuse them when we give them to these kids, but then we don't give our parents any way to recover from the kids being, hey, if your kid was on a 30-day course of antibiotics, well, this is what you should do for the next 60 days. Like, that's what you need to do when you're taking these stuff. So that's another thing. You get sick, you're at the OTC, and all these people are around you, and everybody's got, you know, who knows what they have
Right.
at the OTC, and it's like,
That's right.
you know, and then it's like, okay, I need to go take antibiotics so I can keep training. So then you go on antibiotics, but then you've got to have a plan for when you get off to restore everything. So that all needs to be factored in. And I'm not, again, I think antibiotics are great. It's just you've got to monitor all that, and you got to see how everything's lining up, and then make sure that you heal you seal your gut when you get off of the antibiotics. But this all goes back to the microbiome theory, or I mean, it's still a theory, obviously, but the research is all pointing in this direction.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, I think a good book, like the one podcast that really stood out that I listened to, was with, who was it? I think it was Joe Rogan and Chris Kresser.
Oh yeah,
and
Chris Kresser. Yeah, that's a good one.
Exactly. I think he called it the gut brain axis, and his book Unconventional Wisdom. I don't know if you heard of that, or Unconventional Medicine.
Yeah,
I think that's what it is.
Yep.
That's something I want to read over the next couple of weeks here. But like you said, you can really ruin somebody's gut microbiome, and then that kind of screws them up for life.
Yep.
And especially they don't know how to come back from it.
Absolutely. So, all right, Sean, I think this is a good talk. If you have, I don't know, if you have any more, we can just schedule something later on this week.
For sure, dog.
All right, so everybody, thank you for listening to Dane's platform. Sean, this is going to go up in it's not going to be for a while. I'm going to really try and stock these up. So everybody who's listening to this probably occurred 5 weeks prior. Sean's got a 6-pack right now.
Fuck. Yeah, go check me out on Instagram, SD Throws, and call me out if I don't.
Yeah. All right, I'll see you later, Sean.
All right, see you, bud.
Feel a little more pumped. A little more, or what?
Yeah.